Great. My name is Mark Scully. I'm with People's Action for Clean Energy, and I hope you've enjoyed these presentations as much as I have. I think electrification of transportation, both in individual vehicles and transit buses and school buses, is an important part of the solution to climate change. And the topic of transportation is also much broader than this. So we're really happy to have Gannon Long, who can, I think, broaden this conversation a bit to include things like sustainability and equity and transportation for those for whom electric vehicles really aren't going to be an option for a while. Gannon is with the Center for Latino Progress. She's the assistant coordinator of Transport Hartford. She manages the Road to Zero project, which is aimed at improving pedestrian safety. Anybody who knows Gannon knows she really walks the talk and actually bikes the talk as well. She does not own a vehicle. So we're thrilled to have Gannon. Gannon is pursuing an MBA at UConn right now. So Gannon, thanks for joining us. Over to you.
Hey, thank you, everybody. I'm really grateful to be here today. Up for the occasion, which I haven't done very much this week. So thanks for that opportunity. And I just wanted to, shout out Mark and Pace, the Connecticut Energy Network, and Live Green, and all of the organizers for this event today. There's a lot of changes, and we really appreciate being included and kind of everybody sticking through that. So as Mark said, I'm the assistant coordinator for Transport Hartford. Our organization, the Center for Latino Progress, is based on Park Street in Hartford. And we seek essentially to increase transportation access and safety for folks in the Hartford area. So there's a number of different ways that we organize, educate, and advocate around that. I wanted to start, so I always appreciate hearing Doug Holcomb and folks that really know the technical ins and outs of transportation and how to make it work. I'm kind of a person that I just walk down the street and I have a sense of what I want it to look like. I don't know all the steps and mechanics of making that happen as an engineer. So I really appreciate that perspective. And I'm going to bring today the lenses more of a user of active transportation and mass transit, and just kind of that more layperson's perspective on living a car-free or a car-light lifestyle. I live close to where I work. I live close to where I go to school. I spend a lot of time walking. I have a lot of options in the ice cream arena because my transportation and exercise are usually simultaneous. So I'm going to talk a little bit about mass transit and then a little bit more about active transit. And I want to talk about how all of our choices, impact the systems that we experience. And then at the end, I'm going to just give a quick overview and introduction. Some of you might be familiar with the Transportation and Climate Initiative, but I want to just show a quick slide about that and talk to folks a little bit about how we can get involved in making some regional change. So first, I think it's important to acknowledge the impact of COVID and in transportation. I mean, when you walk around, the rush hour has essentially been eliminated. Late last year, the governor proposed a $20 billion plan that would have widened highways and expanded, roads and induced all kinds of driver demand across the state. This last few weeks alone, we can see the impact of our collective action. And we've essentially eliminated rush hour. We've essentially eliminated the need for a number of parking lots and widening of roads. I'm not sure we're going to be in this situation forever, but I think it's important for all of us to think about what type of collective action what impact can we have if we all take climate change as seriously and existentially as we're taking the challenge of COVID right now. And I think it's important to think about what changes are we seeing. We see a lot fewer cars on the road. We also might see cars speeding a little faster than they normally would. Obviously a lot of organizations, the state of Connecticut, that have been really resistant to telecommuting or working from home. All of a sudden, we snapped our fingers and made that happen. How can we keep some of those clear skies that we're experiencing, those empty roads? How can we change some of that space where we don't need as much space for cars anymore? Maybe we can expand sidewalks. Maybe we can, take over different lots, make wider sidewalks and easier space for pedestrians to get around. So, one thing is sort of a pet peeve, but as I walk around, pressing the walk signal, cars don't have to press a button when they get to a stoplight. The stoplight just recognizes their right of way at a certain point. And so that's something that as we walk around with, with the COVID virus, that might be something to think about if your town can change the traffic signal so that they acknowledge the pedestrian cycle instead of making people press the button for that. So I think it's important to broaden this conversation beyond electric vehicles, and there's a few reasons for that. One I'll get to a little bit later, but acknowledging that in Connecticut cities, our state is some of the greatest inequality in the country, and it's getting worse. And I think the digital divide with the virus and the quarantine is making that worse as well. We should all acknowledge that. We should all acknowledge the difficulties of learning when you don't have a computer or internet at home. We need to think about, our cities in the state of Connecticut. The largest cities here have over 30% of households that do not own a car. So it's not like they're owning a cheap car or they're sharing one. No one in the household owns a car at all. So that means that if our solutions are focused just on electric vehicles, we're going to discount a lot of people from being part of that process. And so I want to focus a little bit more on the mass appeal solutions such as mass transit and the basic idea that people should be able to walk safely in their own neighborhoods. So for one, I'll talk quickly about mass transit. I'm not going to spend as much time on it as I would in general, because obviously with the virus, a lot of folks, I think the ridership is way down, and I'm not going to encourage people to go on a bus necessarily, but we should be thinking about the main people who use mass transit are people in our state, at least, who have no better option. It's not that mass transit is typically the best or fastest or most efficient way to get there. It usually isn't. But we need to think about living in a place where it is the best option. And what would that look like? So if you believe climate change is a serious existential threat to our species, and I hope everybody on this call does, what are you doing to take that so seriously? If you have more than one transportation option, are you taking advantage of that? And are you using your choices to make the system work better for everyone? Because not everybody who uses those systems has that opportunity. And I want everybody to think not just about the most vulnerable users or people that have no other transportation option or car is not an option for them. Also think about people that would like to live a lifestyle. Daphne was mentioning young folks who would like to live a lifestyle where they don't depend on taking car trips everywhere they go. And third audience that I want to focus on is you specifically as a person, your choices, your lifestyle. When you decided to live where you live, is it because it's close to mass transit? Is it because you can walk to the grocery store? Is it because it's near a bike lane that you would let your kid ride home in after school? Or are there some other considerations? And coming from the traffic safety perspective, I think we are seeing fewer road deaths and injuries now that everybody's off the road. And really what that relates to is how fast cars go and how many cars are on the road. So again, if we're just focused on private vehicle solutions, that doesn't take into account the collective impact of more cars being on the road makes it less safe to walk and get around. It also induces demand for our state to continue building out street infrastructure and highway infrastructure, when actually we get a much better return on investment if we invest in public transit options, if we invest in walkability and bike lanes in our communities. So those are some important things to think about. I'm going to go through a little bit on just sort of quickly about individual choices, organizational choices, and then some local government choices that I think folks can focus on. And let's start on the individual level. So for one, I think a lot of us are working from home and are certainly driving less, but how would you have gotten to this meeting in person if it had been held? Would you have driven yourself by yourself? Would you have carpooled? Would you have taken the train? If you're a driver, do you stop all the way at a stop sign? Do you think about what actions you take that might make it less safe or make it feel less safe for somebody to walk around? Because as pretty as you make a sidewalk, if it doesn't feel safe for somebody, they're not going to get around by walking on it. And we need to be acknowledging that. Organizationally, if you're a person who is in charge of an organization or you're a hiring manager, when you're planning events, when you're giving directions to your office or your space, do you provide multimodal directions? Do you encourage people to carpool? Do you have a bike rack outside your building? When you're planning an event off-site, do you think about what the public transit access is? Can a person walk there from a local bus stop, or is it assumed that everybody there is going to drive? And think about the diversity of your event and how those choices impact who can make it and who can't. Another thing I think for organizations to think about, and I could give you a couple examples. One is, as a person who's hiring, there's a lot of jobs, and I'm in the nonprofit sector, there are a lot of jobs organizing around our state. You know, it's a small state, and there's an assumption that people should own a car in order to get a certain job because you're going to be traveling. There's a lot of requirements that say must own a car and a valid driver's license. If you're paying somebody at a nonprofit salary and you're imposing the cost of driving onto them instead of taking it on for your organization, you should really reflect on how efficient and how moral that decision is. And you should think about the people that you might be eliminating from possibility of working in that job because they don't have a car and they're not willing to subsidize the cost of that for a low salary. So that's something I think is really important to consider as a person who's just hiring staff or looking for people on your team, and how can you make that work? How can you broaden the group of people who can work at your organization? So Andrea, if you could put the next slide up, and I'll talk a little bit about transportation demand management. So I put some pictures up for you all. I'm trying to work on looking at pictures and talking more than just reading from my notes and talking. But one of them, and I had a situation, the one on the top left, which is just, it's what it looks like underneath the highway. So if you don't live in a city in Connecticut, you're probably not used to this view. You're probably used to the view above this. But for those of us who live here and walk down Capitol Avenue, a main road in Hartford, part of the East Coast Greenway, this is what it looks like, where we have sidewalks that are just completely blocked by the infrastructure of the highway. And this area happens to be right near Etna. I'm not trying to call anybody out. My sister works at Etna, so I don't want to be, I want to be aware of that. But you know, a little bit different style of transportation demand management between Travelers, another insurance company in Hartford, and Etna, where Etna rents this parking lot from the state. So there's no, the land is being used that way. The city doesn't generate any tax revenue from this use, although the state does. And this area is actually right on the path to the CT Fast Track stop. I don't know how somebody would know that just walking by, right? But this is the part of the path, is you have to walk through the parking lot and all this. Versus if you're an employer like Travelers, you're encouraging your employees to take the bus. You're encouraging folks to, walk to work, to live closer to work. The business case for doing that is that you're saving a lot of money on parking lots and parking infrastructure. For two, your employees are getting to work at a consistent time that's predictable. And for three, it's much safer. So I have at the end of my slides a reference to an American Public Transportation Association study that they did with Vision Zero. And it says that if you're taking the bus, even if you are not actually taking the bus, if you're driving yourself, you're much safer from traffic deaths and collisions in a metro region where more people take more frequent transit trips. So this is important for all of us to think about. And of course, this in the picture next to the one I'm talking about with the kind of overgrown weeds, this is also part of a main street in the city of Hartford. And this is a situation where, the city owns part of it, the state owns part of it, a district owns part of it, somebody else is doing construction work over there, and nobody takes ownership for how the walking experience actually looks. But if that's the way that you're supposed to walk down the street, not everybody's going to make that choice. And we need to think about how our communities reflect the choices that we want to see people make. So I'll talk just for a minute around local, and Daphne did a great job of laying out how accessible our town governments are, our local governments. For one, most towns have a planning and zoning commission. So, these groups they make all sorts of decisions about how land is used in your town or city. Are they, and you mentioned the zoning changes in Hartford. We did pass a zoning change in 2016. They kind of revised our code. Sarah Bronin, the planning and zoning chair, had a lot of work on that. And essentially trying to make electric vehicle charging more part of new developments, but also eliminating parking minimums. So when you build a new development, you don't have to include parking spots, and also adding parking maximums. So there's only a certain number of parking spots you can add. Literally by taking cars off the road and offering other transportation options for people, we're going to be able to reduce risk of injury and death, as well as by helping the planet be able to breathe a little easier. Another thing to pay attention to on the local level is if your town has a complete streets committee. So this is a group that, it might have members of the traffic engineering team and planning the Department of Public Works, might have members, city planners from your development services office, might have folks from the mayor's office, might have traffic police involved, might have local advocates like me, who are, people who just walk around and want a safe place to be. So this is a really great way. In Hartford, our Complete Streets Task Force has been meeting for a few years, and it's trying to coordinate these different things so that if we have a city bike plan and we know that Department of Public Works is going to repave a road, we can make sure they have access to what are the paint lines supposed to look like once they do that repave, and make sure that we're doing these things in a coordinated way. So another thing that you can do, Transport Hartford's done a number of these, but if you're Complete Streets, your planning and zoning folks, your stakeholders in your town, organize a walk or bike audit. Pick a place that you think, hey, this area might need some attention. It doesn't have a good crosswalk. It doesn't have a signal that works. Doesn't, the bus stop is all overgrown and you can't tell it's there. Get some people together, folks who live nearby, again, city folks who work on these issues, and organize a walk audit. Take some notes, walk around a little bit, share what you found, and then spread that information out. It's a good chance to disseminate information and also just to build some community around people who care about these issues. So we have some more information about that on our slide, and I'll just go through these pictures a little bit. So the one on the bottom left is a shot of the state library. To your right and out of view a little bit is the state capitol. This is one of the major intersections in Hartford. If you've driven in here, if you've gone to the state capitol, if you've gone to a show at the Bushnell, you've been there. And for several months, the state of Connecticut had blocked off the sidewalk for some work they were doing on an office building and a garage. And essentially, even just crossing this one street, you can see how wide it is as a pedestrian. And when you have construction workers that aren't taking into account people walking through that area, how unsafe that is and how that looks. This is a mess even without the construction, and I'm hoping someday that there's a state legislator who takes a walk out there and notices how it could be improved. And then on the right, I have some pictures of what we think about when we think about living, active transportation. We think about what does it look like if you have space where people can walk around and be free. And on the bottom left, there's Pratt Street. It's a festival where at certain nights in the summer, they take the cars off the road and let everybody walk around. And it's, some of the most successful events in Hartford. Up to the right of that, I have a couple folks drumming outside of my friend's organization. And see how wide the sidewalk is. Having that level of space for people to just hang out, to get around, to meet each other. That's really what a lively community looks like. It's not people waving across the parking lot at each other from their cars. And then on the bottom right, we have an example of a tactical urbanism project that we did in Hartford. It was a collaboration of the regional planning group, the city, there's an architecture firm involved, some of us volunteers were involved. And this was something where the road, this is the intersection of Main and Charter Oak, it was so wide that cars just go much faster around a turn that's wide like that. And so what we did was we bumped out the sidewalk so there's more space for people to stand. It's bright, it's noticeable, it's visible. And you know what, buses and fire trucks could still take a right very easily on that road. So we have heard a lot of encouragement from folks around this. We're looking for the city to make this permanent, hopefully at some point in the future. So these are some projects. And I guess, actually, Andre, if you could go to the next slide, please. I'll talk a little bit about TCI and then I'll share some references. Oh, it looks like this is kind of messed up in the formatting. I'm sorry about that. So for one, on the left, I have a graph of greenhouse gases. This was from 2016 in Connecticut. And you see transportation is the biggest sector, 38% at the bottom. You also see second to that is electric power. So when we're thinking about electric vehicles, which I'm all for, we need to not just think about the impact on the road, the impact of what that means for building more highways, what that means for safety of vulnerable users who don't have cars or people for whom electric cars are just not an option. We also need to think about the life cycle of the emissions that these vehicles are producing. So the more electric, during the use, it's less emissions than a regular engine. But when they're being built, they still emit a lot of greenhouse gases. And so we need to think about what impact that's having and how we can have an impact that doesn't also include those side effects. So I want to talk a little bit, and so I think that we need to think about it in that sense, right, of those limits. And the appeal of making a mass transit system that is the best option to get around will have a lot of mass appeal, as well as not, it will have mass appeal and be able to get people using that system, as opposed to just keeping a transportation system that only some folks can access. Wrapping up around the Transportation and Climate Initiative. So we talked a little bit about individual, organizational, and local interventions and actions people can take. I want to introduce folks, if you haven't seen this already, to the Transportation and Climate Initiative, which is a regional effort. So this is states, I think New Hampshire has taken itself out, but the other states you see on this map are all involved. And this has been going on for a few years, but it's a regional effort to provide better, cleaner, and transportation options for people all across this region. There's a lot of different organizations involved in the coalition, so you could check that out, and we have some information for you about it. But the idea is that you're going to be capping pollution, and you'll be investing the money that you get from polluters in clean and equitable transportation solutions. So Transportation and Climate Initiative, it's an economic development and job creating engine. You're going to be building sustainable transportation systems, green infrastructure, and transit-oriented development. And this is going to be really important for us as we try to recover from the COVID crisis. We need to think about how we can build our way into a more resilient, equitable, and sustainable future. And I just want to encourage everybody to think about what would it look like if we attacked climate change and took it as seriously as a crisis for our species as we are taking this virus. So Andrea, if you could put the last slide, please. And so this is some of my references. I want to encourage folks, and I think maybe you can, I don't know, maybe you can copy the information, but for one, there's a study about from the American Public Transportation Association and Vision Zero. I would definitely encourage folks, if you're city planners, to look at that and think about what that looks like. How could we apply some of those lessons across Connecticut? I should have mentioned that Transport Hartford organizes every year a multimodal and transit summit. This last one was in New Haven, and so I put some slides from that. I did a presentation there I'd be happy to share as well. There's a keynote address. We did a survey about the Transportation and Climate Initiative. It's a good educational tool, as well as giving you a chance to express your thoughts. So if you want to take a look at that, there's a couple of bus plans. I, of course, put my speech in there from January. And here's some ways that you can follow up. So I would invite everybody to join the Transport Hartford newsletter, especially if you're interested in state policy. A lot of legislative agenda items are on hold for now, but we have a really engaged group of folks. We give a lot of information. We share information about meetings like this. We also have a Facebook group where you can get further studies, and then a Facebook group where you can engage in these discussions and people get real animated on that. So I think I'm getting close to my time, so I'm going to wrap up, but just thank you again, everybody, for organizing this and inviting me to speak. And I'm happy to stay around for questions or answer them later as it's useful. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Gannon. That was I think you made some great points and made a great presentation. So everyone, round of applause for Gannon. Yay, loved it. There haven't been any messages so I guess there may be more questions that come up as people think about this kind of stuff. But I think I will keep moving forward, and then if people have questions, can get back to you about them.
Great, thank you.
Perfect.